My name is Daniel Troop. I'm the founder and executive director of the National Prison Debate League. We're very happy to bring you the second half of an NPDL doubleheader today, live from Maine State Prison. We have an amazing group here, a very special group from Maine, our friends from Maine, the Convictionists team from Maine. And they are not only a well-seasoned team here in the NPDL, but they also boast an officer, Bill Bruns, who's on the team. So we're doing some groundbreaking work up here in Maine, and they're taking on the formidable Harvard Debate Council, who's in attendance here today. And we have a very challenging policy topic. We're going to go on a foreign policy topic that is complex. So I'm interested myself to hear how these teams attack it. Today's debate is about resolved. The United States should change its foreign policy position regarding defense of Taiwan from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity. The incarcerated intellectuals of the Convictionists team from Maine will argue in the affirmative, supporting this resolution, while the Debate Council of Harvard University from Massachusetts will argue in the negative position, refuting the affirmative case. Each debater will be judged upon the following criteria: analysis, reasoning, evidence, organization, refutation, and delivery. The three very distinguished judges of today's debate, who you've already heard from: Dr. Ed Pineda, he's our chief judge. He's an emeritus professor of communication and former director of debate at the University of Georgia. We also have joining us on the panel Rita Rosenthal. She's the director of public speaking at Boston College. And our always punctual John Katsoulis, the director of Fulton Bathing Society at Boston College. Coaching our two very talented teams here today are Trip Reprovic and Jasmine of Harvard, along with Chandler Dougal and Diane Sun, who helped coach the Convictionists. As today's moderator, I will introduce our debaters individually, and they will adhere to their specified time limits. A digital timer will be displayed on screen, and speakers' microphones will be muted if they exceed their time limits. Physical stopwatches are also available to both teams. At the conclusion of the debate, our judges will tally up each team's cumulative point total to determine the winners of today's contest. With all that being said, it's now time to decarcerate some minds by starting this debate. Presenting the affirmative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes is an individual from South Alabama originally. He's graduating with a BA in Liberal Studies from UMA next month, University of Maine, Augusta, due to be released in November, and plans to pursue graduate studies in industrial organization psychology with a concentration in executive coaching and consulting. Please give a warm welcome to the affirmative team's 1AC, Dustin Carpenter.
Thank you, judges. If the history of nations, policies crafted from one age must be renewed and strengthened to secure stability in the next. Strategic ambiguity is like a blinking yellow light at a dangerous intersection. No one knows who is supposed to stop, so everyone inches forward, and eventually someone makes a fatal mistake. Strategic clarity turns that light red. It removes doubt, it imposes order, and it prevents the collision before it ever happens. Today, the affirmative stands for a principled shift away from strategic ambiguity towards strategic clarity, a clarity that is conditioned on two requirements. First, Taiwan must not formally declare independence from China, and second, must not attack China. Our case proceeds in 4 parts. The affirmative's first position is that ambiguity increasingly creates room for miscalculation, and acting on those miscalculations has a historical tendency to provoke and escalate war. Beijing views Taiwan as a breakaway province, and according to BBC reporting, has not ruled out the use of force to reunify with it. Taiwan, by contrast, sees itself as a self-governing and politically distinct entity. Ever since signing the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the United States has a legal obligation to sell Taiwan the weapons it needs to defend itself, but has adopted a policy of not declaring whether we would or wouldn't come to Taiwan's defense were Taiwan ever to be attacked. This vagueness is what is known as strategic ambiguity. In South Vietnam between 1961 and 65, American ambiguity encouraged North Vietnamese escalation. This forced Washington into a credibility trap where large-scale war became the only way to avoid appearing unreliable. Ultimately, uncertainty doesn't prevent conflict, it invites aggression. We see similar patterns today. Xi Jinping has linked reunification to national rejuvenation in his new era ideology. According to Hunter Kerr and Christopher in their 2020 Defense One article, "It's time to talk about Taiwan." Beijing has increasingly demonstrated assertiveness, from militarizing the South China Sea to weaponizing economic leverage. In a 2013 Reuters report, Xi declared that cross-strait disagreement cannot be postponed forever. Richard Haas and David Sachs argue in their 2020 Foreign Affairs article, "American support for Taiwan must be unambiguous," that strategic ambiguity has run its course. They warn that miscalculation is the most likely catalyst for war, and note that allies often assume the United States would defend Taiwan even if Beijing doubts it. That gap between assumption and declared policy is dangerous. If Beijing questions American commitment, ambiguity weakens deterrence rather than strengthens it. The affirmative second position is that the geopolitical conditions that once made ambiguity effective no longer exist. Strategic ambiguity was rational in 1979. At that time, uncertainty characterized all three actors. China lacked the military capacity to seize Taiwan. Taiwan's national identity was not yet consolidated around independence, and the United States enjoyed overwhelming military superiority in the Western Pacific. Ambiguity deterred both Taiwanese independence and Chinese aggression, but those conditions have changed and suspicion has intensified. According to reporting from the Associated Press in 2023, Chinese leaders increasingly believe Washington seeks to contain China's rise. In such an environment, ambiguity only reinforces mistrust. During the Berlin crisis of 1961 and 62, when JFK reinforced troops and publicly declared West Berlin non-negotiable, the Soviet Union stopped short of direct confrontation, demonstrating that clear red lines reduced miscalculation and narrowed the space for adventurism. By contrast, in 1990, Saddam Hussein misread U.S. signals about Kuwait, invaded, and triggered the Gulf War, showing how unclear communication can lead to conflict. Strategic ambiguity was designed for a weaker China in a different era. Today, Beijing's modernization and coercive activity under Xi Jinping's new era ideology make miscalculation more likely, not less. When the environment supports it, clear signals can stabilize and remove doubt about consequences. The affirmative's third position is that conditional strategic clarity preserves the status quo, maintains the one China policy, and prevents escalation while providing a clear legal basis for defense. Conditional strategic clarity means the United States will defend Taiwan only if two conditions are met. First, Taiwan must not declare independence, and second, must not initiate aggression against China. If either condition is violated, the guarantee does not apply. This structure prevents moral hazard. Haas and Sachs argue in their 2020 Foreign Affairs article that clarity can coexist with the one China policy because ambiguity was never codified into treaty law. It was a unilateral policy choice. A formal declaration of defensive intent does not alter diplomatic recognition. It simply clarifies consequences for the use of force. Writing an Oxford academic in 2024, Austin Wong and Charles Wu suggest that conditional clarity can function similarly to historical ambiguity by linking U.S. support for Taiwanese restraint. Their research indicates that when defense support is explicitly conditioned on Taiwan not declaring independence, Taiwanese public support for independence declines, while deterrence against Chinese coercion remains intact. Conditionality stabilizes both sides, but signaling must be credible. Therefore, the affirmative proposes amending the Taiwan Relations Act to explicitly authorize U.S. military action in the event of an unprovoked Chinese attack, subject to congressional oversight. Codification transforms resolve from rhetorical to institutional. It reduces reliance on presidential discretion and embeds commitment into law. The president would then issue a public declaration affirming this conditional guarantee. An analysis from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs suggests that clarity of commitment can reinforce deterrence without abandoning foundational diplomatic principles. Transparency reduces the space for miscalculation. Under this framework, nothing changes about Taiwan's sovereignty status. Nothing changes about formal recognition. What changes is predictability, and predictability is the foundation of deterrence. The affirmative's fourth position is that the economic stakes alone demand clarity, not calculated vagueness. Even if one sets aside questions of credibility or alliance politics, the economic stakes demand decisive deterrence. Taiwan produces approximately 65% of the world's semiconductors and nearly 80% of advanced chips, according to Ethan Chaffee in U.S. Naval Institute proceedings and Mike Gallagher in Foreign Affairs. These chips power smartphones, automobiles, artificial intelligence systems, and advanced military platforms. Taiwan is not peripheral to the global economy. It is central. David Sachs argues in his 2024 East-West Center occasional paper that China's growing military and economic weight requires clearer U.S. commitments to sustain deterrence. Bloomberg Economics estimate that a war in the Taiwan Strait could have raised roughly $10 trillion, around 10% of global GDP. That is not a regional disruption. It is a global depression. Supply chains would fracture. Markets would convulse. Critical industries across Asia, North America, and Europe would face immediate shock. And if Taiwan's semiconductor capacity were absorbed into China's industrial base, Beijing would gain unprecedented leverage over global technology supply. Strategic geography compounds this risk. Raymond Kuo, citing General Douglas MacArthur, describes Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier within the first island chain. Control over Taiwan would reshape maritime power projection across the Western Pacific and alter trade flows that underpin global commerce. The costs of defending Taiwan are significant. The costs of failing to deter aggression are exponentially greater. Strategic clarity strengthens economic deterrence by reducing miscalculation, enhancing the credibility of sanctions, and reassuring allies and markets. The single most effective way to avoid a $10 trillion global economic collapse is to prevent the war that would cause it. The question before us is not whether strategic ambiguity once served its purpose. It did. The question is whether a policy crafted in 1979 can indefinitely deter a war in a dramatically different strategic environment. It cannot. Taiwan is now central to U.S.-China competition, alliance credibility, and the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. When the risks include nuclear escalation, global recession, and alliance fracture, ambiguity becomes a gamble. Conditional strategic clarity, not recklessness. It is disciplined deterrence. It preserves the one-China policy. It restrains Taiwan from unilateral provocation. It deters Chinese aggression. It embeds commitment in law, and it protects a global economy that cannot absorb the shock of war in the Taiwan Strait. And so we return to the choice before us. At a dangerous intersection, a blinking yellow light does not prevent collision. It invites hesitation, misjudgment, and risk. Strategic ambiguity asks all parties to interpret the moment for themselves. Conditional strategic clarity does something different. It turns a light red. It tells you exactly where the line is and exactly what happens across.
That's time. Thank you very much, Dustin. And please remain here for, I'll introduce your opponent on Cross X. Joining us here for cross-examination from the negative team for 1 to 3 minutes. Majoring in political science, originally from Lexington, Massachusetts. He enjoys reading, chess, and obviously debate. Please welcome Jamie Leviton to the stage. Jamie. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. So my first question for you is, what does strategic clarity mean? Is it a publicly stated commitment to defend Taiwan?
Yes, but what we're arguing is conditional strategic clarity. Our clarity is based on 2 conditions. First, Taiwan must not declare independence because we believe that would provoke China. And they cannot go on the offensive against China.
These would be like red lines that China cannot cross. These are things that, like, if China does, then the U.S. would.
No, if Taiwan does, Taiwan must not declare independence. Taiwan must not attack China. Because we believe but what that would do is provoke China.
But these are commitments that the U.S. would agree to, right?
With Taiwan. Yeah, Taiwan must agree to them.
So so if China invades, like if China interprets that Taiwan has violated these things, would it invade?
Well, this is what I think. I think they would most likely would be gray zone tactics.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they would necessarily. They might.
Is there any scenario that they don't?
Yeah, because
So if there's a scenario that they don't, why would that not destroy the credibility of the red line?
I think that would destroy the credibility of China actually, not.
So
not
if China doesn't attack us,
Xi Jinping's whole campaign is based, it's the new era ideology, is based off of reunification of Taiwan. He says that would increase national rejuvenation.
okay, and what happens like if Taiwan misinterprets a signal or China misinterprets something, would they still go to war?
We would make policy that is very clear, so that wouldn't happen.
Okay, what are these policies? Like, what are the things that you're gonna say?
It's super easy. Do not declare independence. Do not attack China.
Okay.
Right?
So what if like Taiwan has a boat out in the ocean and China assumes that that's an independence threat? Would that result in war? Like, what are the scenarios?
No,
that
China's already doing that. That's gray zone tactics, right? Even the blockade, even international law says a blockade is an act of war. However, if all they're blocking is weapons, I don't think that the affirmative doesn't think that that's necessarily an act of war.
Okay. So why would clarifying we wouldn't attack be seen as a threat by China to undermine the regime's interest in Taiwan?
Can you repeat that?
Like obviously China's interested in Taiwan. They see it as like a major point of reunification, as per your arguments. So if China's like, okay, the US is going to intervene by this policy, why would that not incentivize them to attack before the policy goes into place?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you asked, because under our policy, nothing really changes. The only thing changes is we're drawing a line. And actually,
That's time. Thank you, fellas.
Okay. Moving into the negative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes. So individuals also from Lexington, Massachusetts is well represented in Maine today. Majoring in economics, enjoys reading, movies, hiking, and hopefully delivering this next speech. Please welcome Harvard's Maine Musabo. Welcome.
Whenever you're ready.
First off-case position will be the China relations dissad. U.S.-China relations are stabilizing but tenuous now. Bonnie Lin, journalist surveying experts on U.S. and China relations, wrote in 2026 that 2025 was a tumultuous period. Tensions spiked amid a heated trade war with geopolitical flashpoints. Relations stabilized after President Trump and Xi concluded trade and economic agreements. But major questions remain about the future outlook of the relationship. The plan implodes the balance. China will move to reunify the mainland and provoke an all-out economic conflict with the United States. Stephen Worthium, a lecturer at Yale Law, writes in 2022 that for decades, China has refrained from attempting to conquer Taiwan by force, but has retained the threat to do so. If the United States appears to regard Taiwan as irrevocable strategic asset that could never join with the mainland, then China may resort to either launch an invasion out of fear that it must act now or accept that Taiwan is lost forever. The policy to defend Taiwan is degrading that long-standing policies have underpinned the bilateral relationship and preserved peace and stability across Chinese officials. Chinese officials may conclude that the U.S. will grow only more determined to defend Taiwan and that China's existing threats no longer suffice. China could move up its timeline for reunification and become more willing to risk economic and military conflict. That spills over globally, collapsing the global economy. Ben Chu, a journalist, writes in 2025 that the U.S. and China account for such a large share of the global economy that an all-out trade war would likely harm other countries' economies in the form of slower global growth. Global investment would suffer, and China is exporting more goods to the rest of the world than it imports. Firms would seek to dump them abroad, threatening jobs and wages, and the spillover impacts would be highly negative. That causes war in multiple vectors, which cumulatively outweighs the case. That's White 24. Economic stagnation will be the catalyst for conflicts and troubles that fuel radicalism. Nationalism leads to far worse trade disputes than we have seen. That could create a conflict and a battle for resources that would intensify as growth slows. Conflicts could erupt between the US and China, Taiwan, Korea over the South China Sea, Russia, and India. Next off is a Japan proliferation dissident. Japan proliferates now. Zhang Tong, a journalist, writes in December 27, 2025, that experts estimate that Japan has a political motivation, but also the technical capacity to develop nukes in less than 3 years. Japan harbors ambitions that the Prime Minister is seeking to create a legal opening, given the increasingly severe security environment that Japan could or should possess nuclear weapons. That's driven by uncertainty around our strategic posture towards Taiwan. The plan prevents that. Yuki Tatsumi et al., a senior fellows at the Stimson Center, write in 2024 that as China expands its nuclear capabilities, Japan is uncertain about what exactly would trigger a U.S. military response, and the impact of a conflict involving security partners with flashpoints in the region. Credibility is crucial for Japan's defense policy. Japanese prolif is good. It counterbalances China and Taiwan, preventing all-out war and preventing their impacts. Retta Sold, an embassy specialist, writes in 2021 that acquisition of nukes by Japan counterbalances stockpiles of neighboring states. Since the Second World War, the international community went through widespread nuclear prolif. War never transpired between nuclear states. 40 years later, the trend remains unchanged. Japan has been hesitant to acquire nukes as a U.S. nuclear protection. If Japan wants credible protection against nukes, it is reasonable to conclude the only worthwhile deterrent is another nuclear weapon. China's significant nuclear stockpile is of great concern to Japan's strategy, which centers around the U.S. nuclear umbrella. However, untapped potential in deterring expansionist behavior by advocating nuclear proliferation in the region means there is much to be lost in the realms of democracy and human rights if China can freely set the agenda. Nuclearization of Japan could help shift the regional balance as a counterbalancing force. And it could allow Japan to unsettle China, which would provide further incentive for China to lay off the invasion of Taiwan. Next, it stabilizes East Asia and bolsters the LIO and democracy, which spurs burden sharing and solves domestic polarization. All those factors contain exigent crises. That's Robert Kelly, a professor of political science, who wrote in 2022 that a South Korean Japanese nuclearization is long overdue. Cheap writing and strategic immaturity are long established, and the U.S. is finally achieving a more restrained, less sprawling foreign policy, a less gargantuan defense budget with greater focus on China and fewer forever war interventions. If allied democracies want nuclear weapons, then the U.S. should accept that liberal alliance should not tell its partners what to do. Interest in WMDs is defensive and follows decades of restraint. Allied cheap writing is bad for the U.S. at home, too, where militarized hegemony is deeply toxic to U.S. domestic politics. Burden sharing would be good for U.S. values, with direct South Korean and Japanese deterrence is increasingly a better option than alternatives. Now for the case. Strategic ambiguity deters both PRC aggression and Taiwanese provocation. Even if it fails to deter China, it also enables effective informal ties with Taiwan, which check conflict now. However, absent that stance, China would immediately first strike Taipei, which escalates. Red Brenson, a professor of political science at Vanderbilt, writes in 2022 that those who endorse abandoned strategic ambiguity fail to appreciate the full range of the policy's benefits. Strategic ambiguity is not merely designed to deter China, though that is one key aim. The policy tries to mitigate two pathways to war. First is that China might attack Taiwan because it perceives that Taiwan is moving too close to independence. Second is that China might attack Taiwan to prevent the US and the Taiwan from becoming too closely allied. Supplying arms to Taiwan and leaving open the possibility of stronger intervention obviously deters China from attacking, and ambiguity reduces perception that there's an impending formal alliance. An underappreciated purpose of strategic ambiguity is to allow the US and Taiwan to cooperate informally without provoking military reaction from China. This includes arms sales and US military training and de facto US embassies in Taiwan. Ambiguity is inevitable, even assuming the plan due to structural features of US politics and complexity in IR. The F cannot solve. Joshua Rovner, an associate professor in IR, writes in 2021 that ambiguity gives policymakers freedom of action and avoids shackling US policy and the interests of foreign partners by issuing specific promises. Ambiguity is inevitable where misperception and interpretation are common in the Taiwan Strait. Suppose the US promises to defend Taiwan. Would the US respond in kind with China, targeting the island with attacks against unpopulated areas? We cannot know who will take the office next. Clear signals have short shelf lives where future perceptions are unknowable. Now, their argument assumes ambiguity causes a miscalculation because uncertainty involves conflict. But that gets the mechanism backwards because strategic ambiguity is designed to create uncertainty for both sides. China cannot be sure the US will stay out, and Taiwan cannot be sure that the US will automatically bail it out. That uncertainty is inherently stabilizing because it means that because it deters Beijing from attacking while also restraining Taipei from taking provocative steps. The rest of their evidence is actually helpful for us because, yes, she links reunification to nationalism and is not ruled out force, but that's exactly why clarity is more dangerous. Because if the US abandons ambiguity and signals a firm defense commitment, Beijing is more likely to conclude that the window for peaceful reunification is closing and that must escalate sooner rather than later. Ambiguity avoids creating that now or never incentive for regime. Also, their claim that ambiguity is the most likely catalyst for war ignores that the biggest trigger is not uncertainty alone, but the perceived movement towards Taiwanese independence or a formal US-Taiwan alliance. Ambiguity reduces both of these and preserves arms sales and informal support without crossing the line into a commitment that could provoke a Chinese first strike. Now, the argument about a blinking yellow light is false because Xi does not want to invade Taiwan now and there's no risk of miscount. His posture of national rejuvenation is a rhetorical political tour with military advancements making war less likely. However, officially taking its stance risks Xi being forced into offensive acts. Drew Blanchett, Freeman Chair in China Studies at the Center of Strategic International States, writes that there's no conclusive evidence that China is operating on a fixed timeline to seize Taiwan. The heightened worry in Washington is driven primarily by China's growing military capabilities, rather than any indication that Xi is actually preparing to attack the island. He would prefer to preserve his freedom of action on matters of war and not lock himself into plans which he cannot escape. Chinese leaders in the past have chosen options other than military occupation to achieve their own objectives. The United States risks overcompensating in ways that do more to escalate tension than deter conflict, and second, losing sight of broader strategic conflicts is more likely to confront. Another mistake is to presume conflict is unavoidable, because by doing so, the US and Taiwan bind themselves. Whereas the United States backs China into a corner by permanently stationing military personnel in Taiwan or making another formal mutual defense commitment with Taipei, Chinese leaders might feel the weight of nationalist pressure and take drastic actions that could devastate the island. They would face unprecedented diplomatic blowback and sanctions, where conflict would incapacitate one of the world's busiest maritime corridors and disrupt China's and Taiwan's.
That's Tom. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, coming up next to offer a cross-examination from the affirmative team. He's originally from Boston, but grew up in Western Maine. He's graduating in May with a master's in adult and higher education. That's awesome. He's working in education full-time here at Maine State Prison. And this is his fourth NPDL debate, so he's a veteran. We're looking forward to hearing what Patrick Dapolito has to say. Patrick, come on down.
Really quick for the crowd, I believe that I'm going to be taking cross-ex as long as you all can hear me over there. Is that all right? Could I get some confirmation?
They tell you that you can do it. Augusta, it's good. I got it.
Perfect. Gotcha.
So China currently reserves the right to reunify by force, correct? We right?
Does China, I guess, what do you mean? Like, who gives them that right?
Do they reserve the right? They said they prefer to reunify with peace, but they also reserve the right to reunify with Taiwan by force if necessary.
Sure. Our argument is that Taiwan does not necessarily, or that China does not want to take these forceful actions. We think that, however, that like clarifying ambiguity would violate their anti-secession laws.
So, but with all due respect, so if China's already committed to using force if necessary, how is ambiguity, or how has it actually in any way limited Chinese aggression?
Well, the argument there is that, like, just because they're doing this buildup and just because they're saying that they will use force doesn't actually mean that they want to. So the last piece of evidence we read specifically talks about how China wants, or how Xi is specifically using it as like a political tool as opposed to like an actual intention.
Well, see, now our contention is that ambiguity invites aggression, right? And my colleagues later in the debate will expand on that excessively. But to us, should we be prepared if ambiguity fails? Should we be prepared to use military force if necessary?
I guess.
Or should we just accept the fact that China will take Taiwan by force?
Well, the question is that this ambiguity means China is not going to attempt to take Taiwan by force in the first place, because China doesn't know the extent.
They've stated that they would be willing to do so.
But they haven't, because they don't know the extent of the US response. For example, if China places an aircraft carrier 2 miles from Taiwan, they're not sure what the US is going to do. They don't know if the US is going to send in a battle group.
So if ambiguity requires, it basically relies on China correctly interpreting the US intentions, right?
Well, it relies on China. Well, the point of ambiguity is that neither truly understands their intentions. And because China and the US are interdependent on each other for things like trade and like semiconductor chips, they're not going to want to risk a war that would destroy their own economy and destroy the global economy.
So you don't think that China, China would go conventional to protect their interests on an island that's the largest producer of semiconductor chips?
No, because they have a larger interest in like preserving the global economy.
So in '79, the US could be ambiguous, right? Because there was a policy around a weak China, a China with no navy. Now that they have the largest navy in the world, what why is hoping that China doesn't act? Why is hoping somebody doesn't break into my home better than putting a no trespassing sign on my front door?
Well, I guess the argument there is that even if there's like this no trespassing sign, the intruder doesn't know what's actually inside the home, and so they're not
Right,
actually.
and with all due respect, if there's not a big dog behind the door, then the no trespassing sign is kind of useless.
But it's a risk of a big dog behind the door, such as like economic fallout.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you both. Okay. Coming back to the lectern for Harvard, offering the negative team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes. Please, from Lexington, Massachusetts, once again, welcome Jamie Leviton.
The affirmative does not solve the case, and we are turning their warrants. One, ambiguity is a two-sided deterrent, not just a Chinese deterrent. Strategic ambiguity is good because it manages both pathways to war. It deters Beijing from opportunistic aggression and restrains Taipei from moving towards formal independence under the assumption of automatic US backing. Our Benson evidence says that clarity is destabilizing. Ending strategic ambiguity prompts China to attack Taiwan. They perceive Taiwan too close to independence, and the US and Taiwan are too intertwined, which causes Xi to lash out. That outweighs on time frame. Xi will be tempted to act immediately and decisively to exploit confusion around a 180-degree shift in US policy that's magnified by Trump. Gary Schmidt and Michael Maza, senior fellows at AEI, write in 2020 that getting rid of strategic ambiguity is dangerous if American capabilities do not align with American intentions or commitments. If Beijing assesses that Washington is afflicted with strategic insolvency, Xi might be tempted to act sooner than he otherwise might. Second, the affirmative destroys the current sweet spot that actually checks conflict now, and the status quo solves the app. Our evidence does not just say ambiguity maybe deters, it says that ambiguity is what makes current US-Taiwan operations even possible. Our Benson evidence explains that informal cooperation like arms sales, training, quasi-embassy ties, things like these exist because Washington has not announced a formal defense commitment. The app trades away these real stabilizers for a louder signal that is less credible and more provocative. It means they undercut the mechanisms helping Taiwan survive in the short term. Third, the app does not solve because ambiguity is structural, not optional. The Rover 4 warrant is that ambiguity and miscalculation is baked into the issue. Even if the US says we will defend Taiwan, China still will not know what counts as a trigger, which cyber attacks, blockades, strikes, and offshore targets or limited coercion qualify, and whether future presidents will honor the same rhetoric. It means clarity cannot eliminate uncertainty in practice. At best, the plan changes rhetoric, but does not produce durable or interpretable commitments. Fifth, there's no impact to the affirmative. Xi is not looking to invade absent the app. The Bianchi and Haas evidence are explicit that there is no conclusive evidence or a fixed timeline for an invasion, and that current alarmism is driven more by Chinese growing capabilities than by proof Xi is preparing to attack now. A Taiwan war would wreck Xi's broader grand strategy. It would damage China's access to finances, markets, foods, energy, semiconductors, which all check conflict more. Most of their evidence just broadly says Xi is threatening war to bolster his public image, so they aren't generally credible. Only the AF pushes that scenario over the brink. Sixth is that real escalatory triggers is declaring defense commitments. Our Blanche evidence warns that the United States making a formal mutual defense commitment corners Beijing and forces them to act. Chinese leaders could feel nationalistic pressure and take drastic action. Benson adds the historical and strategic mechanisms. When a new alliance is forming, adversaries have an incentive to strike before it becomes operationalized because a credible defense commitment would take time. The app opens a window for Chinese invasion first strike on Taipei to block the alliance before it happens, which answers their arguments and explanation for why clarity is a deterrent, because clarity can generate the incentive to strike. Now, none of their arguments about solely setting a red line around Taiwanese independence apply at all to these arguments specifically. One, China does not limit its red line to a formal declaration. Our evidence says Beijing also fears incremental drift towards independence and deeper US-Taiwan alignment. It means the app cannot fall back on only we defend Taiwan doesn't formally declare independence, because China would still see the plan itself as proof Taiwan is being permanently pulled outside of its orbit. Second, the plan looks like a quasi-alliance. Benson's warrant is that strategic ambiguity reduces the perception of a pending US alliance, and the app reverses that. Even if it's a conditional pledge, it tells Beijing that Washington is moving towards a more formal security relationship, which is historically the fight to stop it before it solidifies. Third is historically true. China has attacked to block alliance formation before. Our evidence gives a concrete historical example. In 1954, China attacked islands in the Taiwan Strait, trying to prevent the US and Taiwan from implementing a mutual defense treaty. It means it's not just Taiwanese independence, but rather China's preventative action against the growing US-Taiwan security defense movement. 5 is no independence doesn't solve because Beijing can redefine what counts as independence. The rover evidence is key. Terms like unprovoked aggression are inherently uncertain and out of context. China can reinterpret referenda, constitutional reforms, military cooperation, so that the plan does not reassure Beijing, it just creates a fight over what these things are. 6, the app changes Taipei's incentive even without formal independence. US commitments can make Taiwan society more supportive of independence by saying that we now have backing from the United States. It does not require an immediate declaration. It's just enough that Taiwan grows more confident, which means Beijing is more openly testing the limits of this guarantee. Then that escalates. 7, war can happen over fear of a permanent loss, not just legal status. Our evidence is specific that if the US appears to treat Taiwanese strategic assets like they can never join the mainland, Beijing might conclude it now has a must act now or lose window. That logic applies even if the app says no defense, because Taiwan declaring independence still thinks that China still thinks that the island is slipping away. 8, Xi is not on a fixed invasion timeline now, which means a plan is the reason that the invasion happens. There's no conclusive evidence Xi is preparing to invade now. Now, all of the things that they're saying are just broadly gesturing for a political agenda. If China is not rushing to invade absent provocation, then a major US policy shift is more likely to be interpreted as the thing that forces China to escalate. 10 is powers fighting for bloc futures, not just present action. Russia's attack on the Ukraine party to block NATO's ascension is analogous to this point because broader the Ukraine states often escalate, not because the other side has crossed the line, because they fear it will do so soon. Likewise, Beijing could use force not because Taiwan declared independence, but rather the app signals a future in which independence becomes projected and therefore reversible. All of this is reasons that they cannot solve the case, and it's reasons that strategic clarity is worse than ambiguity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, presenting the affirmative team's first rebuttal is Kate Kelly.
Hello. As mentioned by the affirmative, a trade war between US and China would certainly be disastrous for the whole world. China would face far worse challenges, making it incredibly unlikely that a trade war would escalate beyond what is currently occurring. While China has taken steps to gain some level of food security, they're not anywhere close, and a trade war would result in China losing a large part of its population to famine. According to World Integrated Trade Solutions, the US counts for 17.8% of food imports by China. We account for roughly half of China's imported soybeans, an incredibly important source of nutrition for the nation. We are the source of 63% of China's animal feed, which without China's entire agricultural system would collapse. China has been trying to increase trade with Brazil to avoid dependency on the US, and have made Brazil their largest trading partner under Brazil's current leadership. But they have been under increasing scrutiny from China due to failing quality inspections. Because of this, even through current trade instability caused by our current government, China has increased US imports, up 700% from the year 2000. China only supplies 1% of the US food supply, certainly enough to annoy the average American household due to some shortages, but far short of the calamitous results faced by the average Chinese citizen. While we would have shortages in garlic, tea, and canned mandarin oranges, they would lose the ability to adequately feed the roughly 1.4 billion people who call it home. The Ukrainian war further complicates this, as Russia and Ukraine combined produce roughly 30% of all grain and barley. Conflicts has caused massive shortages already, making China being able to find a replacement for US food not a likely possibility. The current instability of oil markets also heavily calls into question China's ability to wage economic war against the United States in any meaningful way. China is the single largest oil importer, with 33% coming from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. While the US military interventions in Iran and Venezuela, those sources might easily be lost if they initiate a trade war. Beyond that, Russian oil export to China has been dropping because of Russia's increased demand due to the war in Ukraine. 54% of China's imported oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and if their current Iranian government is replaced with one more friendly to the United States, could be cut off from China. As China is reliant on imports for 70% of its consumption, the risk of trade war is much more for China as it stands. The negative team mentioned that a change in our stance by adopting a position of conditional strategic clarity could inflame Chinese-American relations to the point of instigating active armed conflict. It would be possible, not for the fact that China has recently restructured the People's Liberation Army in a way that makes war against the United States near impossible. According to Stephen McDowell of the BBC, the Central Military Commission of China, typically comprised of 7 members, now only has 2. General Zhang Shengmin and Xi Jinping himself. According to Lyle Morris of the Asia Policy Institute, the PLA is in disarray and the Chinese military has a major leadership void. Chinese state-run media Xinhua states that these military purges are done in the name of anti-corruption, but other groups, including the Mercator Institute for Chinese Studies, are finding that Xi is having trouble finding loyalty among his ranks. All this compiles to tell one story, that the PRC has a military that lacks a structure and organization and singular focus required to wage war against the United States. The Chinese military is considerably larger than the United States, as mentioned, roughly 2.1 million personnel compared to our 1.4. It's very possible they currently have more ships in the United States, though they certainly have less tonnage of ships overall. But the ships and equipment they have are vastly inferior to ours. They have 3 aircraft carriers, one a repurposed Soviet ship used for training, one famously unable to launch ships with success, and a new one featuring the newly developed electric catapult system. Their diesel power require frequent refueling and maintenance. We have 11, all nuclear and more weaponized. They have 1 overseas base. We have over 750. The PLA has 3,200 aircraft. We have over 13,000. In 2026, the International Institute for Strategic Studies found that the United States will spend an estimated $921 billion, China's $251.3 billion on national defense. As it stands, we outspend the 2nd through 10th place military budgets combined. China knows we have a severe technological advantage and are not prepared to deal with that non-conflict. Yes, China is building its navy, raising its defense budget, and reorganizing its military at a fast pace, and will eventually have a formidable military. But those days are far away. As it stands, they have more personnel with less leaders, less arms, vehicles, and munitions. China will be singularly focused on Taiwan in this hypothetical aggression, though the last real conflict they've had was in 1979. They are untested, being led by too few inexperienced officers. The US is currently attacking Iran, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Ukraine, Israel, Venezuela, Haiti, and Nigeria. But the unfortunate truth is the United States' largest export is war. And we're always prepared for more. As of yesterday, the US and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire, meaning the conflict could hopefully come to an end anyway. China attacking right after we change to strategic clarity would be the actions of an irrational rogue state, rather than the cold calculation that the PRC has been practicing. They have already postponed their goal of reunification by 2027 due to their military is in. So they acknowledge they are unable to take Taiwan at this time, making now a perfect time to change the status quo and switch to strategic clarity. As for the nuclear argument, we have tried both ambiguity and clarity in regard to nuclear proliferation. Ambiguity gives us mutually assured destruction, the vague notion that no one will use nukes because everyone will. It worked for a time, as has ambiguity in regards to Taiwan. But mutually assured destruction was just a stepping stone to legal means to ensure a nuclear holocaust to be less likely. This was through treaties like the 1968 Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the 2017 Resolution Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. According to Nobuyasa Abe, the former UN Undersecretary General for Disarmament Affairs, have been a resolute plan to avoid nuclear conflict as what is called the second-tier countries to become signatories and gain near universal adoption of this resolution. In closing, ambiguity is failing. China is growing and making clear that it has.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to, our next debater is zooming in because he had finals back in Cambridge. So I'm going to introduce our next debater. We've now reached the halfway point of the debate, so that's a good thing. And leading us in the second round by presenting the negative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes. Please give a warm welcome to a sophomore majoring in applied mathematics. That sounds scary. That must have been a tough exam. but please give a warm welcome to Harvard's Agasta Sridharan.
Thank you very much. All right, let's get started. We're going to start on the China Relations DA. It outweighs the affirmative. Here's the thesis of our argument. The status quo is a fragile but improving US-China equilibrium, with Trump and Xi recently signing a series of trade and economic agreements. The affirmative shatters this delicate balance by signaling that Washington is abandoning the old Taiwan framework that induces Beijing to conclude peaceful reunification is slipping away. So it accelerates coercion against Taiwan and becomes more willing to risk military and economic confrontation with the United States. That causes decoupling and an all-out trade war that's magnitudes worse than previous skirmishes you might have seen in the past year. Because the US and China anchor the global economy, that escalates into worldwide economic collapse, which in turn fuels nationalism, protectionism, and great power conflict. As per my opponent's explicit argument, we all agree that a trade war is bad, which the affirmative said themselves due to war, famine, etc. But we access that internal link better as per our dropped internal links above. Now, our internal link to trade war comes first on time frame. The moment the affirmative is passed, economic decline will immediately ignite the globe, whereas Taiwan invasion is slow and cushioned by intervening actors, which for some reason was their own argument in the last rebuttal, which we are explicitly conceding. This also implies that the status quo solves the affirmative. Economic interdependence between the US and China structurally disincentivizes Xi and Trump from going to war because they all care about domestic legitimacy, but the affirmative is the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is their own argument about Taiwan semiconductors, which again, we are conceding. Now, I'll answer all of our opponents' arguments. They say that China has increased US imports. That is our argument. That is a reason why they won't go to war in status quo. So status quo is terminally sustainable. There's only a risk the affirmative makes it worse. Why would you risk it? Now, their arguments about structural instability in China, like Ukraine, oil, etc., is not a reason why China would not go to war with the United States. It doesn't assume the affirmative, where Xi is made powerless and nationalistic pressures collapse the Chinese economy, which are a vastly larger scale than anything on the scale of Venezuela or oil prices. And our internal link is about the global economy. So if the US and China economy collapse causes global collapse, that was conceded above. Both countries are so integral to the backbone of our society, whereas European populist leaders, African instability, etc., means that even if China won't wage war directly versus the United States, even a small-scale conflict can snowball. This is bolstered by their argument that China has 2.4 million more artillery soldiers and all their arguments about China's defense budget. This explicitly contradicts their other arguments about why China would ever care about Taiwan or invade. We will concede again that China is raising their defense budget now. Those days are only far away now because there's no reason to escalate unless there's a diversion from the status quo via the affirmative. Now, the rest of their arguments about reunification are relevant in the context of this argument about the economy, but it does take out their offense about Taiwan war. It does take out their offense about Taiwan war. They say that ambiguity promotes mutually assured destruction and or they're analogous. This is not analogous at all. MAD requires mutually assured nuclear destruction. Both sides have to have clear second strike nuclear capability and know that war guarantees catastrophic retaliation. Strategic ambiguity is categorically different. It is a political signaling strategy where the US keeps China uncertain about whether it would intervene, while also keeping Taiwan uncertain about automatic US backing. So, ambiguity might create caution, but it's not because it guarantees mutual destruction. It works by making both sides hesitant, not by establishing a stable nuclear balance. In fact, if anything, the affirmative is wrong to call it MAD because ambiguity is valuable precisely below the nuclear threshold. It deters aggression and restrains provocation without locking either side into automatic escalation. Now, the only hope for the affirmative is to say their specific plan solves our economic decline link, which was not explicitly applied in their speech, so you should not fill in the blanks for them. However, their conditions do not solve the interpretation problems. Terms like declare independence in their first speech or aggress China are contestable and inherently vague. Think of it like this. Beijing can treat lots of Taiwanese conduct as de facto independence. This includes constitutional reform, a referendum, diplomatic upgrades, or even closer military coordination with the US. That means the affirmative does not create clarity at all. It just creates a new fight over what counts as provocation, while still worsening China's perception that the US is revising the old framework. Also, their conditional clarity argument still collapses the status quo because the issue is not what conditions they write down, but what Beijing hears, which is a more explicit US defense commitment to Taiwan. Only our evidence prices in the effect of perception on the economy. China is not only worried about a formal declaration of independence, our evidence also says that Beijing fears incremental drift towards separation and deeper US-Taiwan alignment. The plan is certainly that. Third, conditional clarity is still economically escalatory, even if it's not maximally hawkish. Our warrants in the 1NC on the case was that danger comes from the broader policy shift. If China concludes the US is steadily degrading the long-standing Taiwan arrangement and doing a total 180, it would probably move up its reunification timeline and become more willing to risk military and economic conflict with the United States. Now, the only other argument they can crossplay is the affirmative prevents a war. Filter this through, again, time frame. At best, Taiwan war is far off and happens in years, whereas the moment the affirmative is passed, the global economy will react negatively, which spirals throughout and causes a global recession. That means the affirmative gets it the other way around, and only we control the direction of any impending war in the status quo. Now, go to our proliferation contention. Our opponent's rebuttal did not say anything about the proliferation contention. You should be extremely skeptical of them trying to invent new arguments that were not presented explicitly. Japan proliferation outweighs the affirmative. Japan is already moving toward nuclear breakout because it doubts whether the US would actually defend the region in a Taiwan crisis. The plan solves that uncertainty by making US commitments clearer, which removes the incentive for Japanese proliferation. Up to what I just said, you might be thinking, this is the affirmative's argument. We make everything clear, we just solidify the red line. That is precisely our argument because it causes Japan to acquire nukes. But we have evidence that Japan proliferating and acquiring nukes is actually good. There's two reasons for this, which our opponents did not answer. One, deterrence. Acquiring nukes scares off Chinese encroachment and incentivizes China to, quote, lay off an invasion of Taiwan, which spirals into global war. That turns the affirmative. The plan makes allies in Taiwan dependent on the US nuclear umbrella, which reduces their structural resilience in the face of Chinese invasion. So only under the affirmative can wars ever escalate. This is so important. And you have to remember that their speech read so many words for why war would never escalate in the status quo, for why there's alt causes, for why the status quo is stable, and for why trade wars would never escalate. That is in fact our argument. The affirmative is the only chance in this debate for diverging from that tenuous status quo. Two, the liberal international order. Our Kelly evidence, which was dropped, says that Japan and South Korea are free riding off the United States. That causes an overstretched American defense policy and budget. That strains US democratic values by depriving allied democracies of the autonomy to choose whether to arm themselves or not. That also primes us for increased interventions, which structurally raises the chance for war. Okay, just in case confused, I want to sum up what we made with the proliferation argument, which they still haven't answered in this debate. Because the US posture toward our allies is inherently uncertain, Japan is freaking out and proliferating and about to acquire nuclear weapons. This is a uniqueness claim that is substantiated by 1NC evidence. However, Japan acquiring nukes is good, which is the reason why the status quo is good and why the affirmative is the only chance of conflict.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Presenting the affirmative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes. This gentleman's 33 years old. He's been incarcerated for 12 and a half years. He will be finishing his bachelor's degree this summer. That's awesome. Loves to play Magic the Gathering and has read likely over 2,000 books. So please give a warm welcome to the affirmative team's second constructive speaker, Zach Malou.
Judges, today deterrence is everything. My partner Dustin proved that dual clarity restrains Taiwanese independence, despite what they're telling you. I am here to prove that in the reality of 2026, strategic ambiguity is no longer a shield. The status quo is dead, and the adversary is literally seeking permission to strike. I will present 4 contentions. First, the death of our 1979 policy. Second, the demands of our frontline allies. Third, China's military purges and gray zone escalation. And fourth, the casualty calculus of getting this wrong. Let us move to our first contention. Strategic ambiguity is no longer viable because the United States is actually already moving beyond it. On December 2nd, 2025, the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act was signed into law. Despite a fractured Washington, this act passed in both chambers with unanimous consent. The act mandates updated engagement guidelines, periodic reviews, and lifting self-imposed restrictions from strategic ambiguity, diplomatic red lines. With this, Congress has effectively declared the era of strategic ambiguity is outdated. For our deterrence to be credible, our declaratory policy must now match the trajectory our Congress has set into motion. Next, our second contention, the plea of our allies. Dustin warned you that ambiguity creates a dangerous credibility gap between our assumed support and our declared policy. Now we must look at what our frontline allies are actually doing to survive that. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. warned that in the Taiwan contingency, quote, "It is very hard to imagine a scenario where the Philippines will not somehow get involved." His government backed those words by expanding EDCA and granting U.S. forces access to bases in northern Luzon, roughly 250 miles from Taiwan. Japan has actually gone even further. On August 8, 2023, the ruling party's vice president, Toro Aso, declared that Japan and the United States must have the resolve to fight for Taiwan. Tokyo then executed its largest military buildup since World War II, deploying missile and electronic warfare units to Yonaguni Island, barely 70 miles from Taiwan's coast. Mainland China is only 100 miles from Taiwan's coast, which means Japan's sovereign territory is actually closer. Our allies are currently laying their lives and infrastructure on the line. Maintaining ambiguity while our allies pour billions on frontline clarity creates a dangerous planning vacuum and signals unreliability. To maintain the trust of our allies, the United States must match the clarity our allies have already adopted. For our third contention, we must assess the adversary. China's military command is experiencing historical internal upheaval. Taiwanese President Li Ching-te confirmed in February of this year that out of roughly 40 full-rank Chinese generals, only 2 remain in secure active posts. On January 24th, Beijing purged the PLA's top general, Zhang Yusha. According to defense analyst Kate Tristan Tang, the princeling was removed over a fundamental internal dispute. Xi Jinping publicly mandated that the PLA be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, yet General Zhang explicitly resisted this plan, arguing that a successful Taiwanese invasion timeline must be delayed until 2035 to ensure operational readiness. Despite this setback, Xi isn't slowing down. Instead, he has leaned harder than ever into the strategy of paralysis. He's using extreme gray zone tactics to strong-arm Taiwan into submitting willingly before a war is attempted. We are witnessing these gray zone acts escalate week by week. Status quo, there is no status quo, it's getting worse. Take China's Justice Mission 2025 exercises. This was a massive live-fire blockade just 24 miles offshore, proving Beijing can strangle Taiwan's entire economy at a moment's notice. But in January, they actually went even further. By sending a military drone into Taiwan's sovereign airspace, China shattered the status quo they keep talking about for the first time in 70 years. That's kind of... Anyway, the United States has relied on diplomacy to handle these issues. We have repeatedly condemned these acts and verbally demanded that Beijing stop. And China has completely ignored us, choosing instead to ramp up their aggression. Why? Well, because strategic ambiguity relies on guesswork. It creates a dangerous vacuum where China feels emboldened to push the boundaries of incremental strangulation, betting that we won't actually intervene. Finally, for our fourth contention, the mathematical cost of actually getting this wrong. In the July 2025 CSIS Lights Out War Games, the cost from ambiguity is absolute. In an iteration where strategic ambiguity caused a delayed response, the United States suffered a staggering 16,943 deaths. They also lost 34 surface ships and 2 aircraft carriers. Judges, those nearly 17,000 casualties weren't over a span of years. That iteration was a 4-week simulation. Let's put that into perspective. The Vietnam War, the United States lost roughly 58,000 troops in over a decade of major combat. That is an average of 16 dead Americans per day, a toll so severe it broke our nation's political will and forced a total military withdrawal. Under strategic ambiguity, the US would lose an average of 605 Americans every single day. This is almost 40 times the daily slaughter of Vietnam. That devastation would cripple the Blue Water Navy, triggering nearly a $10 trillion collapse in global GDP and permanently shattering the United States' position as a global stabilizing power. Rather than summarize my contentions, I must remind you, the ultimate objective tonight is simple: preventing a war. To do that, our sole focus must be maximizing deterrence. We must expose a fatal logical fallacy right now. Strategic ambiguity did not prevent war for the last 50 years. What prevented war was China's physical inability to actually win that war. The true deterrent has never been the vague diplomatic policy. It's actually been America's military superiority over China. Therefore, to actually prevent war in this modern era, we must adopt the posture that maximizes our tactical advantage. Strategic ambiguity handcuffs our military planning and broadcast hesitation. We need strategic clarity to grant our military the permission to defend the Indo-Pacific, because the lower China's probability of military success, the less likely they are to ever pull that trigger. Strategic clarity is not a provocation. It is honestly the ultimate necessary tool for preserving peace, considering the status quo is dead. Things are progressively getting worse. We can't pretend they're not. Please vote affirmative.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, we're on to our last round of team rebuttals. And starting us off will be the affirmative team for 3 to 5 minutes. Their team's second rebuttal. This individual is a junior at the University of Maine, Augusta, where he's pursuing his bachelor's degree in health and human services. He's also a veteran of the NPDL. He's participated in multiple debates, and he is also active in the Missions Dog program. So here to offer the affirmative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, please give a warm NPDL welcome to Dylan Ketchum. You start when you're ready.
Our second constructive proved that strategic ambiguity is no longer a shield, but a deadly broadcasting hesitation. Our own government has already acknowledged this policy is obsolete through the unanimous passage of the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act, making a shift to clarity mandatory for 2026. Harvard says that clarity will cause supply chain issues, but it's actually the solution. US factories won't build ships or missiles without a long-term demand signal from the government. Clarity provides the political and financial green light needed to fix our industrial base. As House Amendment Service Chair Mike Rogers stated in 2026, we must provide certainty to the industrial base. A policy of clarity justifies the massive investments needed to outproduce any challenger. Without this mandate, we stay stuck in the just-in-time mode. Clarity is the spark for a national mobilization that turns our perceived industrial weakness into a visible long-term deterrent. Clarity is also the best deterrence to worldwide trade problems. If deterrence fails, then the world can't afford the alternate. Harvard thinks that clarity will cause domestic backlash, but Americans care about their wallet. In 2026, the public knows that if Taiwan fails or falls, the global economy will collapse. Because of this chip shortage, defending Taiwan is about protecting our silicone shield. As Brooks in 2026 reports, the destruction of Taiwan's democracy would trigger an economic apocalypse. Polls show that Americans support clarity when they realize it's an act of economic self-preservation. By framing the commitment as a way to save our tech and our jobs, the U.S. builds a strong domestic mandate. Clarity turns foreign war into a national survival mission that the public can get behind. The negative fears a nuclear tripwire. They think that only the affirmative's position would cause a nuclear war. But ambiguity actually makes nuclear war more likely. This is because the rules are unwritten. If Beijing crosses an invisible line, the U.S. is forced to react, potentially triggering a spiral neither side wanted. Strategic clarity establishes a fire break. The Brooks Institute in 2026 argued that we must think clearly and realistically about how we defend ourselves. By defining exactly what triggers a U.S. response, we prevent the accidental escalation that happens when two superpowers stumble into a fight. Clarity isn't a path to war. It's a set of traffic lights that keep a conventional crisis from turning into a nuclear disaster. The negative team claims clarity is a red line provocation, but in 2026, the real danger is a Chinese miscalculation. Ambiguity relies on Beijing guessing we might help. Clarity ensures they know we will. As the Brookings Institute in 2026 notes, strategic ambiguity no longer strengthens deterrence. It invites Beijing to test American resolve. By removing the gray area, the U.S. replaces a dangerous gambling environment. Instead, it changes it out with a firm deterrent. Clarity doesn't start a war, it prevents it. This is because it makes the cost of invasion crystal clear. Before the first shot is fired, ensuring that the People's Liberation Army never assures that the U.S. will be on the sidelines. The negative says that clarity scares off our allies. But the reality of 2026 is that Japan and South Korea are more afraid of American indecision. When the U.S. is vague, our allies are forced to hedge or appease China. This weakens our team. As Kettigan Media in 2026 notes, predictability is required for a regional partners to align their defenses. A policy of clarity gives our friends a stable anchor. It allows them to build their own militaries around a reliable U.S. plan. By being clear, the U.S. creates a unified front that is far more likely to keep the peace than a group of nervous, uncoordinated partners. Judges, we must act now to avoid the casualty of calculus. That this is when War Games has shown that 605 Americans are predicted to die every day unless we avoid. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Dylan. And presenting the negative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, taking the lectern one more time. Please welcome Harvard's Maine Musavo.
The order is going to be the Prolif DA, and then the Taiwan Relations or Econ DA, and then the case arguments. Here is a frame for this debate. No affirmative speech has answered our proliferation DA, so you know that the affirmative concretely causes global war. In contrast, we have a swath of defense against their arguments, which reduces the risk of war. Japan proliferation outweighs the affirmative. Here is our thesis here. Allies like Japan doubt whether the U.S. would actually defend the region in a Taiwan crisis. The plan solves that uncertainty by making U.S. commitments clear, which removes the incentive for Japanese proliferation. But Japan acquiring nukes is actually good. That's our argument, because if Japan got a nuke, that would incentivize China to lay off an invasion of Taiwan, which would spiral into global war because they're scared of a regional counterweight. They also dropped the only external impact of the liberal order, and that the status quo solves the affirmative. Our Kelly evidence is really good because it says that Japan and South Korea are free riding off of the US, which causes an overstretched American defense policy and budget, which makes our commitments to Taiwan clear that we would prevent, and it incentivizes Taiwan to bolster their defense budget and prevent conflict. Now for the econ TA. Their only answer is that if Taiwan falls, the global economy will collapse. However, they haven't contended with our timeframe distinction, so you should filter this through timeframe. First is that war is far off and at best in years. That is their own arguments, which we have conceded. Whereas the moment the affirmative is passed, the global economy will react negatively. That means the AF gets it the other way around because they didn't answer our magnitude distinction. Our internal link is about the global economy, so it encompasses a Taiwan conflict and other conflicts in India or Africa, which outweigh the affirmative. Now, the thesis of our argument is that the status quo is fragile but improving. Now, the affirmative shatters this delicate balance because it signals that Washington is taking sides, which causes a decoupling and an all-out trade war that is magnitudes worse than previous skirmishes. Independently, because the US and China anchored the global economy, that escalates a worldwide economic collapse, which in turn fuels nationalism, protectionism, and great power conflict. Now, the 1AR mishandled the reason for why the status quo solves the affirmative, because economic interdependence between the US and China structurally disincentivizes Xi and Trump from going to war because they're talking about domestic legitimacy. But the act is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that is their own argument about Taiwan's semiconductors. Now for the case. Here's a huge framing argument for the affirmative. What is the impact of the affirmative? Why does aligning with Congress and the pleas of our allies matter? Because you know that Japan prolife and global economic decline outweigh. First, their argument about how US Congress is already moving beyond it does not necessarily prove ambiguity is non-viable. That's not a reason to formalize clarity. Second, first, this is factually false. The act does not create a new mutual defense commitment to Taiwan. It just requires a recurring review and updating of State Department guidelines governing US-Taiwan engagement. It's about contact rules and reporting, not about an automatic war guarantee. Secondly, that actually helps our argument because the status quo is already seeing an incremental drift, which is exactly why we think that DAF is dangerous. Because the Worthium evidence we read, the logic there is that the risk comes from Beijing, which concludes that Washington is steadily degrading the old framework and moving towards deeper protection of Taiwan. The answer to harmful drift is not accelerating it with formal clarity, but stopping it before it crosses Beijing's line. There's a reason to reinforce strategic ambiguity. Next is their allies argument, which cuts the other way. Allied preparation is not the same as allied endorsement in US strategic clarity. Frontline states are hardening bases, which is the argument on prolif. All of that means they fear Taiwan contingency spilling onto them, not because they want Washington to formalize a war guarantee. Japan militarizing stuff and approving a record defense budget is precisely our argument about how the region is already tense. However, we've turned this via our proliferation dissent, which is our argument about allies being nervous. Their claim is that the US wants more US clarity because they fear abandonment. Our prolif DA says that this same fear of abandonment is what pushes allies like Japan towards stronger guarantees. They're basically conceding the internal link to our TA, where uncertainty in the region is already driving proliferation. Now, their impact calculus arguments are wrong. Their math assumes that the only question is how costly a Taiwan war would be if it happened. That misses a prior question of what policy is most likely to prevent the war from starting. Our evidence says ambiguity is better on that question because it restrains both Beijing and Taipei, while clarity risks triggering the very conflict they're impacting. Next, their argument about assessing the adversary is wrong because they dropped our argument that there's no conclusive evidence of a fixed timeline for invasion and that current alarmism is driven by China's growing capabilities. Independently, a Taiwan war would wreck Xi's broader grand strategy of a formidable China with access to finance, markets, energy, food, and semiconductors. This is key because it proves that Xi is just blustering to bolster his domestic image, not trying to genuinely prevent war. But the AF makes it worse because nationalists will end up forcing Xi's hand where he has to act now before it hardens. Now, independently, that means this gray zone.
Thank you. That's Tom.
Good. Now, both teams will present their closing arguments for 90 seconds each, beginning with the affirmative teams. Patrick Dapolito.
The question is no longer whether we should choose strategic clarity, but whether we can afford to ignore the fact that ambiguity has already run its course. It's a weak 20th century tool designed with a weak China in mind. Our opponents have maintained that if Taiwan is assured that the US will defend it, they will be emboldened to declare independence. However, under dual clarity, the US will refuse to defend the island if they choose to do so. As our opponents also contend, a war between the US and China would be an economic catastrophe, no doubt. However, the fundamental question is which approach makes war less likely. By the way, in April 26th, the Japanese Prime Minister had reaffirmed Japan's prohibition of nuclear weapons. They're not going to develop a nuke. Ambiguity does not buy flexibility. In today's reality, flexibility is just another word for miscalculation. In 2024, Dr. Michael Hinzinger, a senior fellow at the Global Taiwan Institute, argued that ambiguity now, quote, empty bluster, inviting the very aggression it seeks to prevent. As Dustin noted, ambiguous US policies led to the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. By not conclusively opposing potential Iraqi aggression, the US unintentionally signaled that they would allow an invasion. Dustin also highlighted how the Berlin crisis in 1961 proved that the clear red line stops wars before they even begin. As Dr. Hensinger also argues, when dealing with a determined revisionist power, vague signals are read as concessions. We're not proposing a radical shift here. We're proposing a policy that finally matches the strategic reality of 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to queue up our next debater.
Just to make sure everyone can hear me all right.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce you now. I just want to make sure your screen is visible for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
One moment, sorry. Okay. Before you begin, I'm going to give you a proper introduction. Our next debater from the negative team to offer their 90 seconds of closing remarks is from San Jose, California. First-year student thinking about majoring in government. This debate might help. There's a lot of issues that need solved out there. She enjoys reading, traveling, and Asian dance. Please give a warm welcome to Harvard's closer, Dora Chen.
Awesome, thank you. This should be an easy decision not to clarify ambiguity. Here is how you should frame this debate. The affirmative certainly prevents Japanese proliferation, which is an essential counterweight to prevent nuclear war in the region, and breaks a fragile tripwire around the economy, which escalates every global hotspot. You're inherently uncertain about what exactly the affirmative solves or what the impact of it is. Remember our argument that terms like, quote, declare independence and aggress China are contestable and inherently vague. Think of it like this. Beijing can treat lots of Taiwanese conduct as de facto independence, but what does this mean? Constitutional reform, referenda, diplomatic upgrades, etc., etc. Their arguments about empty bluster and ambiguous policies are irrelevant. Remember that strategic ambiguity is designed to create uncertainty for both sides. China cannot be sure that the US will stay out, and Taiwan cannot be sure that the US will automatically bail it out. This uncertainty is stabilizing because it deters Beijing from attacking while also restraining Taipei from taking provocative steps towards formal independence. This is a strategic policy that's built for 2026. And all of our evidence is from the last years, and all of our arguments all above also prove that in this economic moment and this moment in international relations with Japan, we must keep with existing precedent. Our ambiguity is able to solve, and no affirmative speech substantiated that Japan cannot develop nukes. Our evidence says that it's possible in the status quo, and the Prime Minister is angling to enact it. At the end, you should weigh impact calculus towards an immediate economic decline that will definitely affect all sorts of wars, as opposed to a long-term impact of their Taiwan war.
Thank you. That is time. Yeah. Okay, so that concludes the speaking portion of our debate, and now it's in the hands of the very capable judges, who I will turn it back to. And while we wait on the judges to tally scores and let us know when they are ready to announce them, I also want to acknowledge a couple of folks that you didn't see take the lectern today. Obviously, Harvard has a split squad because we understand your exams. Thank you for still making yourselves available. And then obviously from our team at the Convictionists here at Maine,
There are a couple speakers that we didn't hear from, or that were part of this cohort for 12 weeks, worked really hard with their teammates. One of them is Luke Tiemann. Luke Tiemann is from a small town in Maine. He joined the military, where he spent almost a decade, did 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. So salute you for that, sir. And also, he's trying to make a positive difference in the world by protecting U.S. interests with Taiwan. So he wants everyone to know, which can only be done by the clarity of strategic strength. That's how you work it. So in that, Luke. Also, Officer Bill Bruns. Officer Bill Bruns. Camera in the moment. Hopefully we get him to speak at some point, because he has a unique perspective as an active correctional officer here at Maine State Prison. And this is the second NPDL cohort he's participated in, helping us make history of breaking down the sort of barriers that, get in the way of progress, human progress, as you've seen here today by these amazing debate teams. So I want to just really recognize Harvard. Thank you for, making the trip. And no pun intended. Their amazing coach, who also you didn't see at the lectern yet, but Trip Reprovic, and Jasmine is also a big, she's not here, but a big part of the coaching, getting the team properly supported, Jasmine Pickett. And again, just thank everyone for their time and energy. So while the judges tally the scores, what we like to do is, we don't like dead air at the NPDL. You guys have heard enough from me. So if anyone would like to speak from either team, to come to the lectern and speak to the people who are tuning in, to be inspired by you all and your stories, feel free to alternate, maybe one per team, until the judges are ready, and we'll announce the scores and we'll get out of here. But definitely, someone want to break the ice, don't be shy now. You want to come up and talk a little bit about the experience. Officer Bruns, if you're interested in sharing. I know you also have unique expertise in this military field. Perhaps you could share some thoughts, because it's a very unique experience. Right? Come on up. Appreciate you. Thank you, sir. Yeah, let the people know what this is like, working with the folks at NPDL.
Well, this is my 3rd time hanging out with the NPDL. The first time we went down to MCC, we had a great time, and we hung out with Trip, and things went a little sideways for us. We had all rookies. Nobody ever debated before. We learned a lot. The thing that was the most fun is we took a lot of people who'd never done it before. We all learned. We came back the next year, and half the team had moved on to other things. And what was great about it is being able to work with staff, actually embracing the mission statement we have at the Maine State Prison to rehabilitate, to work with people, to send them back out into the population and to better themselves. And to see the majority of them move on to a lower security level, to get their degrees, to move on to better things, and to hopefully run into them out in maybe the NPDL land.
Yeah.
And then
We're all over the
some
place.
of them that are sitting right at the desk today helping out in this new cohort, and they're helping the new teams come out there.
Yeah.
And it's fun watching them because they're comfortable doing it. When you see somebody that struggles with public speaking, to be able to feel comfortable to get in front of people from Harvard when they're going to the University of Maine Augusta while being in prison, and to be able to sit in front of them is amazing. But also to see people from Harvard walk into a prison and feel comfortable, and to be able to share this with them, that is amazing for both sides.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fact that Trip keeps bringing them back is a lot of fun. This Trip is a hoot.
Trip is a hoot.
But I love to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Officer Bruns. Because honestly, it's groundbreaking. That's what change looks like. Thank you, Officer Bruns. Trip.
This has been a real pleasure for us. This is one of the highlights of our years for the debaters. This has become a big tradition for us, and I really appreciate being able to come all the way up here and take the drive. It's well worth it for us. I know they're stressing right now. They're just, oh my God, how do we do? What do we think? So it's really excellent. Just for me, it's and I say I think I've done it on all sides now. Coached teams. I was able to coach the team from Finland a while ago, and we did that. So that was fun. So just kind of every part of the NPDL is inspiring and fantastic to me. And I think we go around the world talking about how important debate is. In fact, we've been able to do it in Taiwan once, several times, and so it's really cool to be able to talk about that as well. But to see debate happen everywhere and to be a part of it is just really a huge privilege. And our students also learn a lot from it. we've talked about Taiwan some in our topics, but not in a few years for debate. So we will go through some of our old arguments and getting ready for this. And the other thing is that we're also very happy at Harvard Debate to be able to work with students across Massachusetts. So, so Jimmy and Maine from Amherst, and we've had some Amherst debaters come in the past, and our students from Harvard are there. And so we really believe in making it possible for everybody to debate, regardless of where they are. And so this is for Harvard. So we're really pleased that we can bring so many people from New England here. And so thank you to Daniel and everybody, and to Philip and Dr. Brown, everybody here. So it's just been fantastic, and couldn't we hope to be back many times and to see everybody continue to develop this. Yeah.
So you mentioned you went to Taiwan and actually held some debates. It wasn't about Taiwan.
No. And usually, so it's been interesting. So we've been in China and Taiwan. In China, we can't talk about it. But the students in Taiwan can a little bit more. And so so it comes up.
I can always see how that debate would go if we did the same thing.
Yeah, we were supposed to go in August. I don't know.
You might see this one and not.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trev. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of terms that get thrown around in this work and in debate, but like a community of practice is what you're seeing personified. Like, look at all these different states, different walks of life, and we're here. So Patrick, what's your perspective as a student, sir?
Well, this is my fourth debate, right? I think this is the fourth one I've done.
Yeah.
Hi, John. Yeah, he was my coach on my first debate, actually. I just want to say thank you to Harvard, and thank you to NPDL. Some of us actually set their calendar, the yearly calendar by this debate. So it's phenomenal, right? It builds camaraderie. We've been working together for months now, and it's been phenomenal. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for you guys taking the trek up here. I mean, we're no man's land. The fact that you did it, I heart goes out to you. So thank you very much.
Anyone from Mark? I know there's only two of you in present. Obviously, because folks on video can speak as well. But we want to hear your perspectives. We talk to each other a lot. We want to hear your perspectives. This is unique. So what do you? I know, because obviously you guys debate in pairs and at the collegiate level. So you got a whole squad here. What's this like for you?
I think that this is definitely very different from what we usually do, because typically the typical format is debating in pairs, just me and JV. But I think definitely having a full team around you, two other people that you're sort of thinking about speeches with, thinking about strategy with, is definitely helpful. It's really great for camaraderie. Really thankful for the Convictionists. I thought it was a really great round. Definitely appreciate y'all. Maine's a beautiful state. Yeah,
it is.
It's really
It is. Well, thank you so much. You were amazing. Again, you guys are social ambassadors, whether you realize it or not.
Yep.
And that's never lost on me, because I started in one of these facilities, just in a different state, and worked up to where it's crazy. I'm running a debate league now, but to bring folks together the way we used to and replicate that, and to see that it continues to have that transcendent social impact, it's beautiful to me. Regardless of the judges' scores, you guys are all winners for real. I know it might sound corny to some people, but nobody lost anything, and here a lot was gained. So thank you to all of you.
Yeah, thank you.
You got to thank Chandler. Thanks for all.
Yeah. If anyone else wants to speak, I'm going to check in. The judges haven't acknowledged being ready yet, so feel free. Yeah, absolutely, Dustin.
This is my first and last NPDL debate. I'll come out later this year.
Awesome.
I really enjoyed it. It was cool. I want to shout out to Chandler. We couldn't have done this without you, buddy. And Phil as well. Phil was I've last 3 or 4 days. I've been back and forth with Phil. This was a good experience. Yeah, and so that's all.
Thank you, Dustin. And congratulations. We'll hope to see you on the other side, my friends. And Phil, Maine DOC, obviously Education Department, Nicole, Laura, the staff. Do you want to kind of speak to your Education Department? Because you guys do a lot to make this possible behind the scenes as well. Former NPDL Educator of the Year right here, Phil Picota. Oh, just dead ahead, sorry.
So first and foremost, thank you to everybody who's participated, supported us, watched this over the years and today. These things don't happen without your support. These guys aren't here without tech, without security, whether Buzz is part of the team or not, we can't do it without them. The administration supporting us, backing us, helping us to solve problems, especially on the fly. Nicole, they're not online, we're not online, nobody's watching us, it's happening in the background, it's not for you, so thank you.
That's right.
You guys have been nice. I appreciate it. It can be a daunting thing, the prospect of coming in here to do a debate, but I appreciate it. Perhaps if you come next time, we can show you more of the facility. Trip, as always, love seeing you come up. It's a shame that you guys gotta leave right afterwards, but that's the way it goes. And to any friends, family of these guys here at home watching, thank you. Your support means the world to them. And I'll be perfectly frank with you, I imagine a lot of them did it. So, thank you, the NPDL, Department of Corrections. It's allowed me to do this year in, year out. Looking forward to the verdict and looking forward to it again next year.
Thank you, so, thank you.
We're ready for a decision.
Judges are ready for a decision, so would you, Ed, are you ready to announce it? So the floor is yours, sir.
I'm announcing because Ed's going to leave.
Okay, yep, go. The floor is yours, John.
The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Harvard.
Okay. Congratulations to Harvard.
I want to say one quick thing before I head out. I've got to leave at about 5 o'clock. A lot of the outcome of this debate is predicated upon the types of audience that you have. I think that the affirmative does a really good job of kind of crystallizing some of the questions for a more public audience. The idea about the red light and the yellow light, and the argument that is made about the number of human beings that would die compared to the Vietnam War. So I think that those are some very strong, kind of materially driven arguments that would be persuasive in many settings. For me, you need to be more specific in responding to some of the negative stuff. The Japanese proliferation argument is kind of a compelling thing for me in this debate. You have some threads that you can use where you talk about South Korean and alternative views of agents that would prefer to have the world different. And you need to do more on-point comparison with what you have to say versus the elaborate construction of the Japanese proliferation argument that's made by the negative in the debate. And the other thing that they do well is they try to short circuit the likelihood of you getting to the trade war. But this is an excellent debate. Both sides are to be commended. And I think that the affirmative has lots of opportunities to win this debate. It needs to kind of buckle down more in the way in which the opponent describes the world. You have to push back against it. You know, yes, we're no longer a bilateral world like we were in 1979, but the Japanese proliferation argument talks about the plausibility of a multipolar world in the 21st century and what that would do to risk calculations. And with that, I'm going to head out, but thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing many of you again. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, judges. And with that, let's give the victors their spoils. Harvard, come get your trophy. You guys can shake hands.
I just wanted to ask you, was there, like, us being the convictionists, is that the reason why their trophy was over there?
This is conviction as versus Harvard University.
Yeah, absolutely, California, have to be.
There you go. Congratulations. Good job. Good job. Congratulations. Good job. Congratulations. We'll do some team pick before we get out of here. Great debate. Great debate. Listen, like I said, you guys did great. But again, when you climb that out, you better every time. It's all crazy. You're doing things. I mean, that was thinking like, we don't figure out your necessity to be, right? Yeah, it's not easy. You guys are the way to go. Be very get out of here. I don't want to.
About the debate,
Just got a quick because it's, yeah, you guys want to down there wherever you'd like, or we use the mayor and fix with everybody as we come together. We'll also just reconnect like to right and go over all the feedback and invite everyone back. So virtually, yeah. Yep, absolutely. I got this. You got it? Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Okay.